Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 7-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like. I know it's something as small as just leaving a like on a video, but it really does help me out, and I do appreciate everyone that does take the time to do so. The more you guys interact with my content, leaving likes, leaving comments, and all that fun stuff, it's going to help me out, so I do appreciate that. And if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players. And I cover the sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos or content in general. And for NASCAR, I do go live, and we have a double header this weekend. So I'll be doing 2 live streams this weekend. So if you don't want to miss out, turn the notification bell and subscribe, and it should notify you whenever I do that. And I also have 2 NASCAR videos, so it's going to be a very busy weekend for me, but I am looking forward to it. And if you want to follow me on social media, I'm at ChrisPennell16. If you want to follow me on IG, I'm at CPenn16. And if you want more content over on Patreon, feel free to do so. You get access to all the extra stuff I put out every single day in the Discord chat. So if you're interested, links in the description below. If you're not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. And my first thoughts of this slate is that I don't like it very much at all. Like, usually some slates I'm like, yeah, I definitely like these guys. I like these bats. I'm excited for this slate. And I can generally tell you I am not excited for this slate because there is not like a ton of bats that really stand out to me too much. There's not an offense where it's like, yeah, I got to play them. Yeah, the Yankees are going to grade us the best offense, but I mean, it's just kind of a gross slate. The pitching's all right. You got some decent options in Carrasco and Castillo, but outside of that, it's kind of just, it's iffy, and then the bats for the most part aren't that great either. There's no Coors Field. Just not in love with the slate too much, but it's a slate nonetheless, so we got to talk about it. But we'll start up top with Carlos Carrasco. He comes in at 9,800, and Cookie's looking like the best pitcher on the slate. I mean, he's got elite level talent, and he draws a decent matchup versus the Reds. We just saw Mike Clevenger drop 20 points on them. We didn't give up any runs. The Indians got them to win. Or got him to win, I should say. Now, Clevenger did struggle with his command quite a bit. He walked 3 batters in his final inning, which was very scary, but thankfully he got out of there unscathed because he was my highest owned pitcher. I just went lock button Mike Clevenger, ended up working out, and paired him up with some other pitchers as well that I had in the player pool, but ended up working out. He was the highest owned pitcher on the slate, and I could see the same going for Carlos Carrasco. I mean, the matchup's fine, and Vegas likes him, only 3.85 runs against him, 6.5 strikeouts, 54% chance for the win. If you're looking at his numbers last season, he did have an inflated ERA at 5.29, but his xFIP was 2 runs lower at 3.5, indicating he got very unlucky. And a near 30% K rate, he had good control at 5% walk rate. In the matchup versus the Reds, that's not like one I'm going to go out of my way to target, but on this slate, it's a pretty good one, and I do like Carlos Carrasco here. The Indians should be able to get him to win. Now, they're going up against Castillo, which is not a fun matchup, and the Indians' offense has been dreadful, but I think there's a decent chance they can get him to win. So, Carrasco, he's looking like my SP1, even though it's just, I mean, it's not like I'm dying to play Carrasco versus the Reds, but on this slate, I guess I kind of am just because I think it makes the most sense to me. And I do think everyone's going to have the same opinion there, and I would imagine Carrasco is going to be the highest owned pitcher on the slate at this moment. Then dropping out of Castillo, you could also use him as SP1 instead of Carrasco, or if you want to spend up for pitching, I don't hate him as SP2 either. I think these are the 2 clear-cut best options on the slate. Tyler Chatwood's in a good spot, but I don't think he's as talented as Castillo or Carrasco. Now, he has had a great start to the season, but just overall, I'm going to trust Castillo and Carrasco more than I would Chatwood. But let me just talk about Castillo really quick. He's going up against Cleveland. Now, on paper versus Cleveland, not a good matchup. They typically don't strike out much. They have a lot of switch hitters, so they'll have, the platoon advantage for the most part. But this season so far, they have just downright sucked. I believe they have the worst batting average in the league. I think before last night's game, they were like at 188 batting average, which was the absolute worst. They're only scoring 2.4, 2.5 runs per game, which I believe is bottom 3, if not the worst. I know it was the worst on yesterday's slate, but someone else might be a little bit worse, but overall their offense has just been absolutely dreadful. So if you're just riding the trends of 2020, as of right now, I'm still using 29 stats, and I have mixed in some 2020 stats for some statistics because, it's a couple week sample size. I'm not going to put too much stock into it. I don't think the Indians are going to be this bad of a team, but as of right now, they just downright suck. And Castillo is a pretty good pitcher, and we just saw TJ Antone scored 12 DraftKings points versus the Indians. He gave up 1 run at the end, and that was when the relief pitcher gave up a run. He let one guy get on base, and then he ended up scoring because of the relief pitcher. But Antone looked just fine, and if Antone can get the job done versus the Indians, I'd have to imagine a guy with Castillo's talent. I mean, the guy's got ace level talent, and he's got double-digit K upside. I think he'll be just fine versus the Indians. I hate saying it as an Indians fan, but I'm not that naive enough to say that it's not a good matchup here because the Indians have just been looking absolutely lost this season. And if you're looking at his numbers, he's got some similar splits as to Carrasco. He had a 3.48 xFIP compared to 3.5 with Cookie, 29% K rate, which is only a tick above Carrasco. He did walk more people, though. Double-digit walk rate at 10%, but limited the hard contact, only 1.04 home runs per 9 innings. I wouldn't say it's a much better pitcher's park than Great American Ballpark, but it is an upgrade in Cleveland. Cleveland's still not like the pitcher's park paradise or anything, but it's better than Great American Ballpark, and I think Castillo's going to be fine here. On paper, if you're looking at 2019 stats mixed with 2020, it's not a good matchup for Castillo, but 2020 specifically, the Indians have just not been able to score runs, and I think Castillo is fine as an SP2 option or a pivot off of Carrasco, but I think you can certainly play both. Then dropping out Tyler Chatwood, 9,400. He feels way too expensive, but I think he's interesting. I'd much rather play Castillo because I feel like I can trust Castillo more. If you're looking at Chatwood's numbers last season, he had a 3.96 xFIP, but only a 23% K rate, double-digit walk rate. He's a high ground ball pitcher, though, only a 19.4% fly ball rate. Did limit the hard contact, but I will give him credit. To start the season so far, he has looked tremendous. Like his 2 starts this season, just looking at DraftKings, he scored 28.5 points versus Milwaukee, where he struck out 8 batters and 84 pitches. Then his next start versus Pittsburgh, he had 38 DraftKings points with 96 pitches and 11 strikeouts. And I don't think this guy's going to be putting up these kind of strikeout numbers every single week, but he's hot right now, and it's a pretty good matchup versus the Royals. We saw Cubs pitchers have success versus the Royals for 3 days in a row now. We saw Alec Mills do fine, Kyle Hendricks did fine. Yu Darvish scored 20-plus points, and Tyler Chatwood, I think the trend's going to continue here. I think he's going to be fine. He's a heavy favorite, 62% chance for the win, only 3.9 runs against him, and the strikeouts have been there so far this season. Now, the Royals aren't that high of a strikeout team, but I think Chatwood's going to be fine. He should be able to pick up the win. I think the Cubs are one of the better stacks on this slate. So Chatwood, he's fine. I feel better with Castillo and Carrasco, but I don't hate him as a pivot off of one of those guys. He should have lower ownership, and Vegas does like him in this one. So I think Tyler Chatwood is fine. And then after Tyler Chatwood, it's kind of just throw something at the wall and hope it sticks kind of thing, because I don't really have much confidence in any of these guys. But Jordan Yamamoto, that's always a fun name, 8,400. You could roster him off his name alone, but that's the point we're at this point. But he's fine. His numbers last season, there's strikeout upside versus Baltimore. Baltimore obviously does not have a solid offense, and they're just pretty weak overall. They strike out more versus lefties than they do righties, but there's some decent upside for Yamamoto here. 25% K rate last season. Had a double-digit walk rate and did give up a ton of hard contact at a 48% hard contact rate, 43% fly ball rate, 4.89 xFIP. Look, it's not great. He is a little expensive, but the 25% K rate does draw me in. If you're looking at the Orioles splits versus righties last season, 23% K rate, 170 ISO, but only an 87 WRC plus and a 304 WOBA. It's fine. It's the Orioles, so he's going to be in play, but I don't love it. I haven't seen anything on his pitch count yet, so I'm not sure if he's going to be limited. I checked the news. I checked quite a few sites. I checked Twitter. Could not find anything. So if he's going to be like limited at 8,400, you can just cross him off. But just as of right now, assuming he's going to throw like 80-plus pitches, if he does. If he doesn't, obviously cross him off your list. But he's in play versus the Orioles just because it's the Orioles. Then we have Wade LeBlanc. He comes in at 6,600. I've not seen confirmation who's starting for the Orioles, but from what I've seen the most, it's Wade LeBlanc, so I'll just roll with that. If he's playing, he's definitely interesting versus Miami because they have one of the softest offenses in the entire league. If you're looking at their splits versus lefties last season, they were reverse versus righties, but still overall very weak versus lefties. Only a 22% K rate, but a 132 team ISO, a 78 WRC plus, and a 288 WOBA. It's a very soft matchup for Wade LeBlanc. Now, it's also kind of a soft matchup for the Orioles versus Wade LeBlanc, but I think he's going to be fine here. He held his own in his last start. where he scored 13 points versus the Rays, and actually in his first start versus the Red Sox, he scored 14 points. So he's been fine, and my phone just went off. But yeah, he's fine in his first 2 starts, and at this price tag, it's fine. Now he's 4,400 in his last start, which was much nicer. Now he got priced up to 6,600, so I wouldn't call him like an incredible value, but it's still decently low. And if you want to fit in some top end bats, you can. Pretty much you'd be playing Yankees, maybe some Cubs, but LeBlanc's fine. The matchup's good. His numbers aren't great, only a 17% K rate, but he limited the walks at 6%, hard contact at 35. Did give up over 2 home runs per 9 innings, but look, we're in Miami. It's a pitcher's park, so he's got that working for him. It's much better pitching in Miami than it is in Camden Yards. Camden Yards is one of the better hitter parks in the league. Miami is one of the best pitcher's parks, so that's also a boost for him. Same goes for Yamamoto. I forgot to mention that. So Wade LeBlanc, he's fine, but really after Chatwood, it gets pretty gross. Then Josh Lindblom, 5,300, going up against the White Sox. It's a scary matchup. There is some strikeout upside here. I don't think he's going to do that well, but he's the cheapest pitcher I thought was worth playing. And I also should just say he's the cheapest pitcher on the slate. So if you want to stack up some bats and hope Lindblom just gets you like 8 to 10 points, you certainly could. You could kind of call it like a TJ Antone situation last night. Now, he's not the bare minimum. If he was the bare minimum, I'd have a lot more interest. But 5,300, you're pushing it a little bit, but I think he's somewhat usable. If you're looking at his first start of the season when he was going up against the Pirates, now he only went 3.2 innings, but also remember he had to leave the game due to an injury. I forget exactly what it was. It was, I think it was his back. But he was okay. He scored 10 points. He struck out 5. In the matchup versus the White Sox, it's very boom or bust. They have plenty of power, but they do strike out quite a bit versus right-handed pitching. Their numbers last season, they struck out 26% of the time versus righties. If you add the new guys to the lineup, they're still at around a 25 to 26% K rate to right-handed pitching. So there's definitely some strikeout upside here, but there's definitely some power as well. If you're looking at their splits last season, they've added some new pieces, so they definitely have more power versus righties, and they definitely have some good bats. And I actually do think the White Sox, you can use quite a few of their bats on this slate, like Moncada, Grandal, and some other guys we'll talk about. So I'm not like actively saying, yeah, you got to play Josh Lindblom because he's cheap. No, it's just if you're in a pinch and you want to try to get different in GPPs, I think there's at least maybe some upside for close to double-digit points, but I am not expecting much here. But that's pretty much it for the pitching. Again, pitching's not that great after Carrasco and Castillo. It's kind of just you're hoping for the best, crossing your fingers and toes. So let's just move on to the bats now at this point. I usually say when the pitching is weak that the bats are a lot more fun to talk about, and unfortunately I can't say the same because there's just not a lot of spots I like on this slate, and a couple of the guys I have on here is just kind of pushing it a little bit. But we'll start with catcher. We have Yasmani Grandal, 4,800. I was saying Josh Lindblom is viable, but I also think the White Sox are viable as well. I mean, the guy's not a great pitcher or anything, so I don't mind the White Sox here. Yasmani Grandal's got some pretty good splits versus right-handed pitching if you're looking at him last season. Over a 200 ISO, 240 batting average is not great. He actually had some better splits versus lefties last year, but he's still one of the better hitting catchers in the entire league. So you can certainly look his way at a 372 on base percentage. Not going to have any splits here for Lindblom because he only has one start, and I'm not using a 3.1 inning sample size. But I mean, I'll give the advantage to the White Sox, but at his price tag, Lindblom on DraftKings, it's somewhat usable, but only in a dart throw. And then we have JT Realmuto. He comes in at 4,700, going up against the lefty Jordan Montgomery. Now, I'm not actively trying to stack against Jordan Montgomery, but I know there's no Vegas total yet, but I looked at another site, and it looks like it's around 4.5, 4.6, and if that's the case, there's actually some good value plays on the Philadelphia. I don't know why I almost said the Phoenix Suns. I have no idea why, but the Philadelphia Phillies, they're a decent offense, and I know Montgomery's not like someone I'm just like, he's not like a trash can or anything by any means, and the Yankees obviously have a good bullpen, so it's not like the most ideal situation, but keep in mind, there's just not a lot of places to look for bats on this slate, so we're going to get some decent righty on lefty matchups here for the Phillies, and I don't hate Realmuto. He had some good splits versus lefties last season, a 248 ISO, 524 slugging. Good numbers all around. If you're looking at Montgomery's splits, we don't have too much of a sample size here of last season, so they're going to look a little skewed. Gave up 0 ISO to lefties. That's not going to be the case if you stretch that over a season. Then a 545 ISO to righties. Again, that would come down, but definitely prefer the righties here. Had a high strikeout rate to both sides of the plate, but do prefer righties versus Montgomery. Wilson Contreras, 4,500. The Cubs are looking like one of the better offenses to use on this slate versus Brad Keller. I prefer Contreras versus lefties, but I can't get too picky on this slate because there's just not that many good options. And he still had a 250 ISO to righties last season. If you're looking at Keller's splits, low strikeout pitchers. That's why another reason I do like the Cubs here. And he gave up more power to righties last season than he did lefties, but I think everybody is in play here for the most part. 150 ISO to righties and only a 15% K rate. I think, he did get a lot of ground balls, but I think Contreras is fine here. I think the Cubs, for the most part, do great out of some pretty solid plays. And then if you're looking for a cheap catcher, we have Manny Pena. He's only 2,800 going up against the lefty and Gio Gonzalez. And he had some pretty good splits versus lefties last year, for really, really good. 250 ISO, 146 WRC plus, a near 320 batting average versus lefties. That's not too bad at 2,800. Now, I know the Brewers have kind of sucked so far to start this season, but do prefer righties versus Gio Gonzalez. He has some good splits versus lefties. Righties, not so much. So, do prefer righties here, but really I'm not looking to use anyone on the Brewers. Just Manny Piñas, I think, is the only guy that I have on here. Then dropping down to first base, we actually have quite a few somewhat okay options, but Anthony Rizzo's looking like the clear-cut best option. You also have Freddie Freeman versus a righty, but I would prefer going with Rizzo here. 5K going up against Keller. I think the Cubs are one of the better stacks on this slate. They do grade out pretty well, and I said Keller gives up more power to righties, but I think the Cubs lineup's in play here for the most part. Anthony Rizzo's got really good splits versus righties. He got a 240 ISO, 150 WRC plus last season, over a 300 batting average. And Keller's got a double-digit walk rate to lefties too, so a little bit higher of a K rate, less power given up, but I'll give the advantage to Rizzo, especially if you're using some Cubs. I don't mind that at all. Now, if we're going double spin up a pitcher, we're probably not going to be able to spin up for all these 5K guys, so we're going to be looking at some more cheaper mid-range options, but fortunately, I have some listed here, and one of those would be Jesus Aguilar, 4,200, going against the lefty and Wade LeBlanc. I do think LeBlanc is usable, but Aguilar's got some pretty good splits versus lefties, and if you're looking at his numbers, 130 ISO, 236 batting average, they're not great, but he does have some pop versus lefties. If you're looking at the numbers last season, they weren't that great, but if you look at over his career, someone that we could always target versus lefties, so I think he is certainly in play. And if you're looking at LeBlanc, guy gives up quite a bit of power to both sides of the plate. 319 ISO to lefties, 220 to righties, and only a 15% K rate to righties. And a guy that strikes out quite a bit in Aguilar, I think he's going to be fine. So before we join, it's not my favorite play on the slate because I don't want to use Miami guys for the most part, but he's a decent home run hunting option. Then Luke Voit, 3,900. You could see Mike Ford here, and I'm hoping not because he's a lot more expensive than Luke Voit. But as long as he's in the lineup, which I think he will be, he is certainly in play going up against Zach Eflin. If you're looking at Eflin, you're going to prefer lefties versus him, but I do think this entire Yankees lineup is in play. I believe they're going to have the highest team total on the slate. One place I looked, it was above 5.5, if I remember correctly, and I can't see another team really surpassing that because not a lot of great options. We got the Astros below 5, we got the White Sox below 5, and then we got the Cubs right above 5. So I'd assume the Yankees will have the highest team total, which they usually do most slates unless there's a Coors Field game. But Luke Voit, he's fun. He had more power versus righties last season, 206 ISO, 131 WRC plus, a 270 batting average. Eflin not good at all versus lefties. Some decent numbers versus righties. Only a 3% walk rate, 138 ISO given up, but it's the Yankees lineup. You know what they can do to most pitchers. Then Rhys Hoskins, 3,700. Again, I don't want to really stack versus Montgomery in the Yankees bullpen, but he's pretty cheap, and he's got some good numbers versus lefties, really good numbers. A 536 slugging, a 444 on base percentage, 152 WRC plus, a 275 ISO. I certainly think Hoskins isn't played just due to that price tag. And then if you're going all the way down, we have Ryan O'Hearn at 3,100. I do think Chatwood is a viable option on this slate, but if you're looking for some cheap power starting higher in the order, you got O'Hearn projected to bat inside the top 5 more than likely. Going up against Chatwood. Now, Chatwood has been absolutely dominant to start the season so far, but double-digit walk rate to lefties, more power given up, higher WOBA, and just a slightly above higher strikeout rate, but he's cheap power versus a righty, so I think O'Hearn's fine. Dropping down to second base, I think this is an extremely, extremely weak position, but I got 3 here. We have DJ LeMahieu, 4,500. I preferred lefties versus Zach Eflin, but look, they're probably going to have the highest team total on the slate. Going to be leading off, 4,500. High contact hitter. he makes some sense here. He's fine. If you want to go cheap, you can go Jason Kipnis, 2,800. He's priced all the way down there. And last season, Jason Kipnis was someone I used a ton because I played the Indians and Twins pretty much every single slate. And obviously, he was the cheap second baseman for the Indians. He was usually around low 3K to mid 3K pretty much every single slate. And the guy kept producing like late in the summer. I think it was in July or August. But I just played him pretty much every single slate and it just kept working out. But he's fine. He's going up against the righties. Got better splits versus righties. I'm not going to go too in-depth. It's just Jason Kipnis. It's nothing too exciting. You know what you're going to get from Kipnis. You're just kind of hoping for a walk, a hit, a single, a run, something like that. He does give you that occasional home run. He did homer recently, but he's fine at that price tag, and I do like the lefties here versus Keller. I like the righties as well. Actually, the righties have better splits versus him, but overall, I think the entire Cubs lineup is in play. Then you have Danny Mendick, 2,200, going up against the righty and Josh Lindblom. If you're looking at Mendick's splits last season versus righties, he actually had some pretty good numbers. 273 ISO, 364 batting average, 172 WRC+. Are they skewed a little bit? Sure. But if you're looking for a dirt cheap option, Mendick at 2,200, it's not too bad. And I actually think the White Sox make a somewhat decent stack on this slate versus Lindblom. Then going to third base, another pretty weak position overall. But I got Giovanni Urshela at 4,800. He has been hitting pretty well recently, and he's actually made some good defensive plays. I was watching a Yankees game. I think it was when I stacked the Yankees because I usually just watch the team TV that I stack. He was making some good plays at third base. A nice off-balance throw to throw someone out across the entire infield was pretty nice, so credit for that. And he's been hitting the ball pretty well. Now, he hits near the bottom of the order, which kind of sucks, but all the Yankees are in play here for the most part. He's a little expensive, and I do prefer the lefties versus Eflin, but I mean, there's just not a lot of options on this slate, and if you're a Yankee, you're probably made this sheet for the most part. Chris Bryant, I prefer him versus lefties, but the Cubs are looking like one of the better offenses to target. Them and the Yankees, for the most part, I'd imagine they're going to have the two highest team totals on the slate. But going to be leading off, and Keller did give up more power to righties last season. Bryant's a better hitter versus lefties, but he's still got some good numbers overall. So Bryant's okay. Don't mind him, especially if you're using Cubs. Yoan Moncada, 4,400. He's got better splits versus righties than he does lefties. Looking at his numbers versus lefties, it's not like he's bad, but he's got better splits versus righties. A 322 batting average, 246 ISO, 148 WRC+, and near 600 slugging. I don't mind Moncada at all, 4,400. Then Toro, 2,700. Just a cheap option. He had a pretty good night last night, and he's near dirt cheap. He's on a good offense, going up against Zach. Is it Gallen or Galen? I cannot remember what it was last season. Now, he's actually been not too bad to start the season, but going up against the Astros, they're getting Michael Brantley back, which you guys know I love Michael Brantley. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But Toro's fine. He's pretty cheap, and if you're looking at his splits versus right-handed pitching last season, he had a 236 ISO, a 273 batting average, really high ground ball rate, but I think he'll be fine at that price tag. He's fine. If you're looking for a dirt cheap option, I don't mind El Toro. Then going to shortstop, it's another weak position for the most part, but we have Gleyber Torres, 4,700, just strictly because he's a Yankee, and the Yankees have the highest team total in the slate. At least I'm projecting them to, and I think they do from when I looked at it at other sites, but I know there's quite a few totals that aren't out yet. But yeah, Torres, he's got power to lefties and righties. Now he's been pretty rough. He's been at a pretty rough start to the season, him and Gary Sanchez, but he's got upside here versus Eflin, so I don't mind him. Javi Baez, kind of a similar play to Chris Bryant. Prefer him versus lefties, but I think the Cubs are one of the top targets on the slate, so you can certainly look Baez's way. If you're looking at splits versus righties, still has a 235 ISO, 275 batting average. Just strike out quite a bit at 28%, but Keller's not a high strikeout pitcher, so he's got that working in his favor as well. So Baez is fine if you're using Cubs. Mondesi at 4,200 going up against Tyler Chatwood. I prefer the lefties here versus Chatwood. Not really looking to use too many bats versus him because I have interest in him, and he's been hot to start the season. But Mondesi's been picking it up recently, and he's got better splits versus righties. If you're looking at his splits, we got some darker orange and yellow bars, and they're still not that great, but they do brighten up a little bit here. Now, he strikes out a ton, 31% to righties, but overall better numbers, 270 batting average, and just all around better hitter versus righties. But Someone I do like, Gene Segura, 3,100, third base and shortstop eligible. You could also use Didi Gregorius because he's a lefty and people are going to shy away from that, but I don't really want to use lefties versus Jordan Montgomery. But Gene Segura, 3,100, he had great splits versus lefties last season. He only had an 11% strikeout rate, 129 WRC plus, 274 ISO, 563 slugging, 290 batting average. He grades out pretty well for me, and it looks like he'd end up being one of the better value plays on this slate because, look, there's just not a lot of good options on this slate, and he's fine. I mean, he just stand out at that price tag, and I'm going to be hitting the middle of the order, and I actually do have some interest from the Phillies just because of their price tag, so I like Segura quite a bit. Then dropping down to the outfield, we have the hottest man in baseball, and Aaron Judge. He comes in at 5,300. You could also look at Stanton, but Judge has just been on absolute fire. He's got 7 home runs already. It's like, 7 home runs in past 6 games or something like that. He's been on an absolute tear. So even though I do prefer him versus lefties and I prefer the lefties versus Eflin, he's locked in right now. And sometimes when the guy's locked in like Aaron Judge, who has all the power in the world, it's just going to be home run after home run after home run. Is it going to stop eventually? Sure. Well, no, maybe not, but at some point it will. But sometimes you got to ride the hot hand, and I definitely like the Yankees on the slate, and he's got power versus righties as well. He's a better hitter versus lefties, but still like him versus righties. And Eflin, again, prefer the lefties, but it's Aaron Judge. He can take anyone deep at a moment's notice. Then we have Kyle Schwarber. He comes in at 4,700. Should be hitting cleanup here and gets the lefty on righty matchup. You can't use Schwarber versus lefties. He's pretty much unusable for the most part, but with this 30% K rate and only a 229 batting average, they have power versus them, 220 ISO, but you much prefer him versus righties. A 300 ISO versus them, a 255 batting average, 127 WRC plus, a 550 slugging. He is certainly in play here, and I do like the Cubs on this slate. Michael Brantley, 4,600. They must have listened to my rants about that because they finally priced him up. He was in that 2K range. When he was in the 2K range, that's laughable. 4,600 is a good price tag for Michael Brantley. I think it's exactly what it should be, but he's still going to make the sheet here. He's just really good versus righties if you're looking at his numbers. He only has an 8.6% K rate. He's a high contact hitter, a 323 batting average, 226 ISO. Just good numbers all around. If you're looking at Gallen's numbers last season, you're going to want the lefties versus him. He's got a good K rate versus lefties and righties, but more power given up, 173 ISO and 287 WOBA. So he's fine. I don't love the Astros, but I got a soft spot for Michael Brantley, so he's going to make it on here. Then Aaron Hicks, 4,500. He actually grades out really well versus Eflin because Hicks has better splits versus right-handed pitching, and Eflin's got worse splits versus lefties. So it's actually just the dream scenario for Hicks, and I like the Yankees on this slate. Eflin gives up a 17% K rate to lefties, which is very, very low. Double-digit walk rate, 243 ISO, 356 SWOB. And if you're looking at Hicks splits, he has a 261 ISO to righties compared to a 114 to lefties. So this is like a pretty good spot for Aaron Hicks. Robert, 4,200. He's been hitting the ball really well recently. I'm not sure what to think about with Lindblom here. I think he's playable, but I also think the White Sox are stackable. So it's kind of a weird back and forth situation for me here. But I think the White Sox should be able to do damage. I don't have too much trust into Lindblom. I just think he's just solely a price play. But if I had to bet who's going to have the better outing, Lindblom or the White Sox offense, I would side with the White Sox, and I do think Robert is in play. He's been hitting the ball really well. He's got stolen base upside as well. So if you're going to ride a hot hand, I don't mind that at 4,200. Andrew McCutchen, 3,900. I keep saying I don't love using these Phillies, but I do have quite a few listed here. But he's going to be leading off. If you're looking at his numbers last season versus lefties, he had less power, but he had a 300 batting average, only a 17% K rate, a 20% walk rate, 429 on base percentage. I think he's fine at this price tag. Then Eloy Jimenez, 3,900. Like I said with Robert, I think the White Sox are certainly in play, and he had more power versus righties last season as well. 264 ISO versus them, a 535 slugging, 270 batting average. I don't mind Jimenez. He does strike out quite a bit, but price tag is fine. Then to end this video, we have Jason Hayward, 2,900, just keeping a theme here of some Chicago Cubs players, and he's pretty cheap too, and you get that lefty on righty matchup. And if you're looking at his splits versus righties last season, they're not fantastic, but only a 17% K rate over a 200 ISO, 115 WRC plus. He's fine if you need value, but for the most part, none of these bats got me too excited. Like last night, I was like, Max Kepler, absolutely love Max Kepler. I was actively excited to play Max Kepler. Now, I was not excited for the first 9 innings. thankfully, with 2 outs left in the ninth, he hit a homer, 3-run homer, which was very nice. Thank you, Max Kepler. I had a lot of you, and it was very nice of you to do that. And then Brandon Belt homered like 2 seconds after, and I was like all over both of those guys, so it was a very happy 1 minute for me. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. Yeah, it's going to be it. We have the NASCAR draw coming up tonight, so I'll have my NASCAR video out Friday morning, hopefully. Friday afternoon. Depends when I get up. But, yeah, that's going to be it. And I'll see you guys in the next video. And if you play Call of Duty Warzone, I hope you guys are enjoying Season 5. I am. It's awesome. I'd definitely recommend it. Yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Hopefully you can check out the NASCAR content if you haven't already. Support me on Patreon if you haven't. Follow me on Twitter, all that good stuff. And checking out, and I'm going to bed. It's 2 a.m. and I am tired.